please feel free to contribute, because it's a, it's a forum of learning. We are not here to just understand one person's view, but if your views are different than what the other panelist is saying, you're more than welcome to kind of contribute. A small, set of rules that I would like to imply here. Each panelist can kind of speak on one question for about 6 to 7 minutes, keeping the, constraint of time that we have and the amount of questions that Ms. Rasna has prepared. So the more diverse knowledge that we get, better it is. So keeping that into consideration, 6, 7 minutes, 8 minutes is what we would like you to kind of take on one question. And as I said, this is an open forum. This is more of a casual forum. The idea is to kind of learn from industry stalwarts who have been practicing sustainability and see how best our future generation can learn from it. Our industry, our academia, academicians can learn from it, teach it into the colleges, because ultimately the torchlight of sustainability is not going to be done by a single person, but it is the entire youth community which is going to drive it in future. So with that note, I guess, Vipul, are we on time? 11 o'clock, I think we should look at starting up.
Ravi, quick question.
Yes, sir.
What we see on the big screen is what is being broadcast. Am I right?
That's right. There are other screens also, but because we are a panelist, so we will be visible on top. Rest members, some of them will get hidden because the screen can only take that much. Just to keep updated, I think we have about 120 plus people right now who have joined us the conference. Vipul can give us the exact figure, but we are not bothered about the figure. People can keep it. The idea is to kind of learn. So, without any further delay, I think, ladies and gentlemen, I take the opportunity to give you all a warm welcome for this webinar, which is being organized as an initiative from Servo Hospitality School. We will not talk about Servo Hospitality School today because, probably you can understand what it is from the website. The idea was that we took a topic of sustainability and how our tourism industry can contribute towards sustainability efforts and a better future for our industry and for our future generations. So with this, I would like to start and introduce our panel members today, our panelists. To begin with, Mr. Ram Kumar. A small brief about Mr. Ram Kumar. Mr. Ram Kumar is an author, speaker, trainer, consultant, entrepreneur, and the biggest stuff that he is a farmer by heart and by profession. He has been an expert in applied sustainability. He runs a sustainability consulting company called the Sustainability Partnership. He is also, factoring by the SDGs, United Nations, and he is a part of the National Climate Change Assignment. He has been developing sustainable model for integrated agriculture and implemented farming techniques ranging from high-tech hydroponic farming to now he's going to do a natural food forest very soon, and we were just before everybody came in, we were talking about it. A couple of achievements that he has done, and I was really impressed. Ram is trained in person for climate change after undergoing training program by the former Vice President of US, Mr. Al Gore, and he's a certified sustainable tourism trainer himself. He is also a board member for Global Sustainable Tourism Council. Ram, a couple of good things that I was impressed by, that Ram had cycled raising money for 2 children in charity in Beirut and Dubai. And followed by this initiative of his, he also cycled 4,000 kilometers across India from Jammu to Kanyakumari in 2000, raising money for Neil Bagh School run by Ashraya Trust in Bangalore. So this is about Mr. Ram. Warm welcome to you, and thank you for taking time out and joining us.
Good to be here, Ravi. Thank you.
The opportunity to welcome Mr. Rupesh Rai. Mr. Rupesh Rai is well-known figure and personality in the rural landscape of Uttarakhand. He runs multiple organizations, which is basically works towards farmer empowerment, tourism, and basically promoting the natural farm products of Himalaya. Rupesh Kumar runs multiple brands. He runs a chain of homestays called the Goat Village. He also runs an FMCG brand called the Bakri Chhap. In addition to that, Green People is an organization by itself, which keeps working towards generating social equity and working towards farmer empowerment. Rupesh Rai and myself, we are associated at a personal level as well. We know each other as friends. And I consider him as my mentor and guide as well, because every time I speak to him, I learn something new. So a warm welcome, Rupesh ji. Coming back to Mr. Anand is the CEO and promotes a boutique not homestay, but a resort brand called Tree of Life Resort. Every resort of Mr. Himmat is different. It's unique in nature, by its location, by the way it functions. I have been following Mr. Himmat for a while on multiple social media channels, including LinkedIn and Facebook. His activism style, which is very subtle. I cannot call it an activist style, but every statement he gives, every post that he writes, has got a certain canny sense of humor in it, but in the meanwhile conveys a big and deep messaging to people who really understand. But people really need to be smart to understand what is he trying to say. I think the latest one that I saw was that he mentioned to all the hoteliers, it was a plea that please stop talking about your hygiene and sanitization efforts in your hotel. Because at the end of the day, we are trying to run a hospitality organization, not a hospital. Of course, hospital and hospitality has ITY difference, but this ITY has got great amount of personalization factor. And I personally agree with you. In fact, about a week back, I had posted, a post tagging Mr. Ajay Bakaya, Mr. Nikhil Sharma, and a couple of other folks, because Mr. Chandar Balji from Lockheed Hotels, because I saw that a lot of webinars people were talking about. In their statement, there was somehow a sense of negativity that used to float. Only these three members I saw that were really going out of their way and promoting positivity in the industry. So, I'm with you, though I don't comment on every post of yours, but be rest assured that I read almost all of them. Coming back, Mrs. Rachna Dushyant Singh, I was talking to all the panel members and giving her a brief. I find her as a very, very gracious lady. She comes across as a good human being. She runs a very upmarket homestay by the name Thikana in close to Dehradun, and she's doing another one, which I'm not mistaken is called the Camp by Thikana 2. Now this is not something that we should be talking about. Her biggest achievement that she does is she runs a knitting school for rural women, and her achievement is the institution is called Ankuri. Currently, it's supporting how many numbers, ma'am? If I'm not mistaken, close to.
So we have over 100 women associated with us, but Ankuri is just not a knitting program. The knitting program is just one of its livelihood programs. We are doing other things as well. But yeah, we have over 100 women associated with us.
So with that, I hand over the mic to, there's no physical mic, but yeah, everybody has a mic to Mrs. Rachna Dushyant Singh. She is going to be moderating the entire show, and I will keep coming back and forth. So I'm a listener. Thank you so very much, all the panelists, for joining us. It's indeed a pleasure to have you all. And on behalf of Servo Hospitality School, once again, a warm welcome. The stage is yours, ma'am.
Thank you, Ravi. Thanks.
Thank you, Ravi, for the introduction. I think there's much more all people and introduction, but we can go into that later. My first question, I think, possibly, how do you understand sustainability and tourism? Between meet, mentioned to you earlier, tourism by its very definition is not sustainable. It is definitely luxury. In most, this is of course a very broad definition. So Ram, may I ask you to first give us, what you think about this question. How do you make people understand tourism and sustainability? And Himmat, I'm going to come to you after that in a second, and then Rupesh.
Thank you, Rachna. It's good to be here. I don't necessarily fully agree that tourism is only luxury. I guess in India, the way we perceive tourism to be, it seems like it is in the luxury space. Now, for me, tourism is something that people indulge in as a relief from their everyday life. If we look at it from that perspective, anybody in any strata of society, any socioeconomic group, when they need a relief from their regular humdrum of life, one of the avenues they look through towards is tourism. Earlier, lots of people used to just indulge in going to movie theaters. That used to be a relief from the humdrum of life. So I believe that tourism is meant to be a relief from your humdrum of life. And while we take that relief, the objective for tourism should be to enrich the experience of a tourist. Now, in India, there is still a lot of focus on five-star living. So therefore, most resorts focus on, the physical materialistic aspects of tourism, which I think will slowly become irrelevant, because you still have hotels and resorts boasting about how they have a 50-inch LED TV, and it's irrelevant today because people have home theaters in their own homes. They come to a tourism destination, or they indulge or subscribe to a tourism experience to experience things that they don't have in their own homes, or in their clubhouse, or in their swimming pools in their homes. So if you look at tourism from that perspective, experiences that they cannot get in their own homes, which are enriching, which is, adding a sparkle to life, giving a bit of relief from the humdrum of life, then we'll realize that tourism is not necessarily only luxury. Now, the fact remains that all socio-economic groups don't aspire for the same level of experiences. At one time in my resort, I remember all the experiences that we deliver were rural experiences, rural games. And a corporate wanted to bring actually a group of village kids to experience my resort. And I told them it's irrelevant to them, because I cannot deliver an experience that they will aspire for. Probably if you take them to a shopping mall in the middle of the city, that will be something that they will aspire for. So I don't think tourism is meant to be just luxury. That's the way we have been practicing it in India for decades. And I think that is shifting slowly with people like, Himmat and Rupesh on the panel. They'll be able to explain a little more, I'm sure, that as long as we deliver experiences which are enriching, which are good for our spirit, which is away from the humdrum of life, then tourism will always survive, and it'll stop being a niche activity.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. So before I go to Mr. Anand for the same question, I just want you all to think about one more thing, that which group of people are we targeting? And the humdrum activity and the change will depend on that. If you are talking to somebody who aspires, you see, we also have to think about aspirational mobility over here. If somebody is aspiring to be maybe living in a very small apartment in Delhi, but wants to go to a beautifully appointed, very, tastefully done room to spend maybe 3 days, how do you tell him that you got to go back to the village which you left to come back to come to the city to become whatever? So we are talking about unlearning here also. So I'm going to come back to that in a minute, or maybe minutes. Himmat, what would you like to, what are your comments on, how do we make people, how do you make them understand sustainability and tourism?
So Rachna, in my last 3 decades or so, I've been through the 2 industries, tourism and now hospitality. And I've always wondered, how can the destroyer be the protector also? This has been a question mark to me, even though I come from this industry. Because I think hospitality and tourism are the worst destroyers of the environment, or amongst the worst destroyers, if you really look at it on a larger scale. You can't absolve yourself by saying, I grow my own vegetables, I don't use plastic bottles anymore, I don't use straws. I mean, those are minuscule things when it comes to look at the amount of energy you use, look at the amount of water you use, natural resources, look at the amount of linen, towels, garbage which comes in every day in terms of food waste. So let's look at all of that. And then let's put our hand on our heart and say, can I really be a protector? So with due respect to everybody who's in the environment space, and I don't mean to demean that, I think you need people like that who are able to give us some sanity. I can't believe that those in hospitality and tourism can ever absolve themselves and say, that, you know, we are environment conscious, then you should not be in this industry, honestly. I'm looking at a larger picture of things. Let's look at the other aspect also. Tourism and hospitality, they contribute to 10% of global GDP. There are countries which depend highly on tourism, and for many, it is a main activity of economy. For many countries, it's a main focus. At the same time, hospitality and tourism contribute to 8% of global greenhouse gas emissions. Now, that is where, for me, is the dichotomy, where on the one hand, we are saying we improve standards of living, etc., etc. We contribute to economies as an activity. And then on the other hand, we are actually amongst the worst offenders after usage of fuel and fossils as an industry. So one has to step back, and this debate can go on forever. There are always two sides to it, but I think paucity of time what it is, my first thought is on this aspect. The second aspect, I think we spoke about luxury, and I think the two most misunderstood words for me, both starting with L, one is love and one is luxury. वो किसी को कुछ नहीं पता love क्या होता है, luxury क्या होता है. We keep slamming these two words wherever we want to. Now, luxury can mean different things for different people. You know, imagine a stressed out CEO who's bloody working 20 hours a day. What is luxury for him? To go into the mountain for 2 days without any Wi-Fi, without anything, stay in a tent with his dog and come back. For him, that's a luxury, which he won't get in his normal day-to-day space. So I think you have to be careful. Luxury cannot always be subscribed to something which is upmarket, which is flashy, which is expensive. No, I think those days are gone. Luxury today, maybe 10 years back, yes, what you say is correct. Luxury denoted that. But I think today luxury has very different meanings. I mean, when I started the Tree of Life 10 years ago, what was my mandate to myself? I said, I'm going to provide 10 years back. I said, I will provide luxuries of the future. And for me at that time, what were the luxuries I was providing in my resorts? Space and privacy. Because I knew people from the cities, from crowds, we want to get out, and space and privacy are going to get more and more unavailable easily. So for me, those are the luxuries I offered. I didn't offer rooms of 48-inch TV screens and stuff like that. So I think let us also, whenever we have this debate on luxury, redefine today what is luxury in today's day and age, and not necessarily got to do with glitz and with glamour. Yeah, so my few thoughts on this.
Perfect. Thank you so much. That was really, I mean, it was very, very elucidating. And I like I like your take on love and luxury. It's different strokes for different folks. And, I agree. So, Rupesh, can we come to you now to ask you the question, how do you make people understand sustainability and tourism?
Well, thank you, Rachna. Well, I would just, go back to what Himmat said just now. So luxury is really an outdated concept and almost a redundant kind of, format. The customization is the new luxury. And when you talk about sustainability, I would unbundle this whole, term called sustainability. So there is a, sustainability. When we talk of sustainability and eco and responsible, they all are, some different dimensions of the sort of same animal. Now, when we talk about sustainability, if you unbundle it, there is a planet sustainability, there is a people sustainability, and there is a profit sustainability. Sometimes you are sustainable in terms of, your environmental practices, but you are not sustainable in terms of your, business model. You are sustainable in terms of business model, but you are not doing justice to that, people and planet aspect, the social and environmental aspect. So the right kind of sustainability, what I call, is the responsible tourism, is the just a sort of, right balance of all three. And whatever format of tourism you do, however eco-conscious or responsible tourism you do, you are generating some kind of, carbon footprint. So the idea should be that, the time is for, certain kind of innovation, that how you can offset your carbon footprint. So for example, for us, the tourism is just a sidekick. We use tourism as a prop or a catalyst to propel a marginalized farmer's brand called Bakri Chhap. So the mandate for our team is that every tourist who comes there should go out as a brand ambassador for, Bakri Chhap. So in our, so that's how, because there are limited number of people you can cater through tourism, in terms of, providing employment opportunity to the rural folk, or, whatever are your stakeholders. So the tourism can give employment to limited number of people, but if the farm produces, being consumed of a particular ecosystem, that's like a recurring income, and that gives a, employment to a very large base of people. So for example, if an Indian traveler is coming to your place, he falls in love with your place. At the most, he would probably repeat in a year, or maybe repeat next year. If a Gora is coming, probably he's a once in a lifetime customer for you, because India is a long haul destination. So how do you kind of capitalize, or maybe offset the carbon footprint you have generated? So we have found our way out, that we focus is not to kind of go for one time settlement, which is like one time tourist. How to generate some recurring income out of that tourist and empower the communities? So that's how we try to, we do our bit for that, sustainability bit. And sustainability as a whole, is a very misleading word. Usually we interpret, or we perceive sustainability as environmental sustainability, but it is about your financial sustainability. It is also about your social sustainability besides the environment. That's my take on sustainability.
Okay, thank you, thank you. So the other thing that comes into my mind, I mean, I run a much smaller, I run a similar system on a very, very small scale. Are smaller organizations going to be able to do better, or should there be large umbrella organizations that will do better in this sustainability model? Most importantly, how the level of comfort that you're going to give to your I wouldn't like to call them guests, because they're really going to be participants, because this is something that is going to be changing, ever changing. What is the level of comfort that that you think one should be putting out for people when they come to you? Mr. Ramkumar, can I ask you to consider this question?
Yes. So when I started my resort, Our Native Village, this was exactly what I was trying to prove. The notion of sustainability at one point in time meant frugality. You find those little resorts, and stays in South America and Costa Rica and Philippines, where you walk around with a lamp, you go down to the stream to get your water, and you coexist with nature, in the sense, you have a lot of insects and whatever comes into your room, you kind of coexist with them. That was what was called truly sustainable at that point in time. A bit like a Gandhian way of life, lying on the floor and eating peanuts and drinking cold milk. Now, the fact remains that there are a lot of tourists who are not so deep into sustainability. So those would be the extremists of sustainability, who want to switch everything off and go into the wilderness, so to speak. But I believe that it is possible to live in quotes, a very comfortable, luxurious lifestyle, yet be sustainable. And that is exactly what we went out to prove. That is a model we built when we built Our Native Village, where we said that sustainability and creature comforts, I don't want to call it luxury, creature comforts, a well laid out room with all the amenities that you'd find in a regular hotel room. With all that present, how can you be sustainable? Was a question we asked ourselves. That's when we built our resort, and that's exactly what we achieved. To the extent there you need to start to do the detailed work. For a lot of people, luxury meant using a fancy branded soap or shampoo, a well-branded soap or shampoo, saying that is what people want. And we didn't do that. Instead, we went to the other extreme And we actually got soaps and shampoos custom made for our resort only. In fact, my sister is the one who made it for me because I wanted to ensure complete, credibility and authenticity of the produce. So we used to make all our soaps and shampoos ourselves. And when guests used to see that used to be a kind of luxury, saying, wow, you can't get this in the regular market. You'll get it only even if you come to that room. So we wanted to build a model of sustainability with all the creature comforts that the modern travelers used to at home. Now, the small changes which we took away from that is, those days we didn't have a television or air conditioning in the rooms, because the architecture in the room, you didn't need air conditioning because we use clay bricks, and the architecture molded itself around it. But otherwise, it had all the other luxuries one would look for. It even had a mini library in every room, so that we get people into the habit of being in silence and reading. So can, quotes, luxury and sustainability coexist? Absolutely. Absolutely. In fact, when we went, I'm talking about 2006, when we went to London to get our Responsible Tourism Award, this was actually pointed out by one of the panelists there, where he came to me and he said, listen, nobody's attempted, I'm saying 14 years ago, nobody has attempted trying to do luxury within sustainability. And, and what we had done was something that was sort of unique. And so to answer your question, yes, they all can coexist completely in the world today and completely match the aspiration of the modern day urban traveler. And we've proven that, and that we are confident of now. Rachna?
Thank you so much. Can you hear me? Okay. So my points over here is that Ram, my father comes from a village in Pori. Until my grandmother was alive, we would go there every year. And I still remember she would make the dal. We have a particular dal in the mountains in something that we call bhaddu, which is like a vessel. And it is so evocative because till this day, I am trying to get that, because get that smell of the dal with just the chonka of ghee. But we used to have fleas all over our body. We used to have, it used to be like a nightmare,
Yeah, you're right.
And we used to be playing with my grandmother used to have a lot of cows, and Pahadi cows are very small. They're almost just like little dogs, like a big Saint Bernard. So we used to be all over, and my mother would watch because our stomachs would be covered with these flea bites and all that. It was very good. But when I decided to do my little project in the village, the first thing my father asked me was, he said, I spent my whole life coming away from that village, and you are going back to it. What is so that is the one thing that I want you all to think about. And the second thing is that when we say that we are sustainable, does it mean pretend village atmosphere? Does it mean using how shall I say it? Because I also have young interns coming from Harvard, Princeton, who've never, whatever. We send them into the village. They work very hard. But when they come back, they come to an air-conditioned room with, beautiful, whatever surroundings. And so what does it mean to be sustainable? Do you say that becoming village-like? Himmat, when we go between Jodhpur to Udaipur, you have that Maharani Bagh where you have that woman making the rotis. Is that sustainable? Are these, how do we define what work? And that will be the traveler's mind to say, oh, it's ghar ki. So, we need to come back to that. But Himmat, I'm going to move to you with the same question. How do you juxtapose luxury and sustainability? Where do the twain meet? What is the concept of luxury? And we've already mentioned that definition of luxury is different for differing people. At what level would you stop the comforts? What would you say that, okay, this is what I need to give to because I've been to certain places where, in the name of sustainability, you don't even get the basic, they say rough it out, but they're charging you for it. So how do you Explain that. And how do you not prepare the traveler for it and say that, look, buddy, we are going to be charging you X, but we are going to only be giving you X divided by 50, because this is what you need to learn, because this is how everybody in this country, or say 50% or 70% of the people are living. This is your experience of village life. Where is the level? At what point do you say, okay, these many comforts are acceptable? This is what is a requirement. This is a need, because you see, you have to think of hygiene. I mean, it's all very well for some people to use shikakai soap berries to wash their hair, but my hair will just fall out maybe, or maybe I'm allergic to it. You know, you have all these different things now that are happening. And also, who are the people who are going to be coming to you to pay that kind of money? What level and what background are they coming from? And for example, you said that for a CEO of a very, very tough job, his way of unwinding would be to just go off into the mountains in a room and, with this dog. What kind of things would you give in that kind of a situation to somebody who's going off into the mountains with a dog? Would you just stick him in a room and say, okay, cook your own food and go and have the villagers and take your dog for a walk and cook it on fire, because that is sustainable? I'm not saying that fire, lighting a fire is sustainable, but I'm just giving you an example. Or would you carry the gas and give him a nice set of utensils, maybe not as good as he has, but a basic level of surroundings that he's used to? What is this level? How do you find this level, and how do you define this level of comfort?
So Rachna, let me answer this in two parts. You earlier also spoke about whether it should be the large companies who can do it or the smaller guys who are more capable of doing this. My firm belief is that I'm not answerable for the whole world, and I cannot change the world, neither am I here to change the world. I think if each of us as individuals can just take care of that one person or that one thing or that one activity in a smallest of small ways, and collectively imagine the strength, if each of us did what we had to do, imagine how big this whole activity could be. So when I go and feed dogs in the morning, which I do now very regularly, I don't feed 200 or 100 dogs. I have just a family of 3 who I look after, and I'm very happy doing that. Similarly, in the properties where we are, I am very happy if I can pull every year 1 or 2 people out of the village, get them into the resort, make them a part of my team. And from being a beldar or from being a construction site worker, if we can today be an independent junior chef in one of my properties, even if it's 2 or 3 or 4 people, I'm very content having done that, because like I said, I'm not here to change the world. I'm incapable of doing that. But yes, at the smallest of levels, I can do individual stuff, which gives me the satisfaction which it gives me. The second part which you asked is, what do you give and where do you draw a line? I don't think you can have SOPs for this. Tourism is too wide, it is too large a space. It's like a canvas where every tourist actually comes and draws his own expectations. I think that is what it's all about. So what is important for me is that you as the service provider must put upfront what you're delivering at what price point. That's it. Then it is for the consumer to decide, the traveler to decide whether I want to accept this at that price point or I don't. So our job, I think, in the industry, whether we are hoteliers or whether we are tour operators, we have to be upfront with our product offering. Each of us will do things differently. Like Ram said, it could be shampoos, it could be soaps. And for example, in all my properties, I've stopped using soap. I don't give soap anymore, the soap bars, because I think it is unfair where a guest comes for a night, takes the soap bar only to wash hand and throw it away the next day and checks out. So we've started using liquid lotion everywhere for bath, for whatever. And I keep soaps, I give it only on request. I don't give the normal paraphernalia of shaving brush, cream, toothpaste, toothbrush, comb, all that nonsense which these hotels, sorry to use the word, I don't know if some of you do it or not, but they make that whole basket of things. I think it's a total waste. So I have these things available with me and I charge 13,000, 14,000 rupees a night, but I don't give you all of this because I think this is a sheer waste of just putting garbage after garbage after garbage. And what does the guest do? Since he's paid for it, he'll just pick up everything. Usko chahiye, nahi chahiye, dusri baat, he'll put it in his bag and go away at checkout. Why? Because I paid for it. So what have you actually achieved? Nothing. So my point is, let's give guests what our offering is, and then let the guest decide. So I'm just going to very quickly come to one point. Everybody's talking about safety and hygiene right now. And I don't know whether you'll cover it or not in the next questions, but we've decided that we will go by a minimum standard which is required by the Ministry of Health. I'm not going overboard, but I give the guest the choice if he wants me to repeat the whole process in front of him again, of sanitizing, of cleaning while he's in the room or in the villa, right? So I've done my basics. That is what I'm offering you. Now, if you want it at another level, the second time around, I give you that choice. So I think tourism and hospitality is all about giving choices. At whatever price point you want to fix, let the guest decide what he wants to take.
Perfect. And as always, very, very correct and lucid. Thank you so much, Himmat. Rupesh.
Yes,
So the
Rachna.
game changer in the industry. Let's hear from you. Let's hear it from you.
Well, I think it's well covered by Mr. Ram Kumar and Himmat. I would rather put it this way. Look, the trend in the market is changing. If you talk about the entertainment industry, people are moving away from regular SaaS Bahu serials and they want to consume reality shows. People are moving away from the typical documentaries and they want to see infotainment. So if you see, the trend is shifting towards more, reality. And I think it's high time that travel and hospitality also, shifts its gears. So what we, so we need to, like, for example, we have started a brand called Hideout, where we are not intervening in any of the hardware. The content is the building block of the sort of destination. The storytelling is the building block of the destination. And we are actually sharing like a blood report of every destination, every host and every village, without glorifying or without using, the typical, hospitality or tourism jargons like panoramic or, the sort of personalized service, etc. So it is like kind of, a blood report which tells you how much cholesterol you have, how much triglyceride you have, how much uric acid you have. And despite of that, let the audience open that menu, open that spectrum to the audience. And you would find taker for every kind of, offering. So it is like, in that kind of situation, still there is a carbon footprint which is being generated, because, the traveler is kind of, traveling to that X destination. But comparatively, it is actually bringing satisfaction to the end user. And also it is, less of intervention into, offering means actually you are somewhere you are financially sustainable, socially sustainable, and environmentally sustainable. So I'll just quote one example of, one of, 10 years ago, I was part of, Taj Safaris, which is a joint venture between CC Africa and Taj. And there was a board meet. And in that board meet, there was a kind of some serious tussle between, both the parties. Like Taj was going through some sort of, the reputation crisis in terms of their luxury standards. So they had a consultant who told them to benchmark against Ritz-Carlton. And Ritz-Carlton came up with a campaign that, 51 identical roses in a bouquet, that, you cannot differentiate between, you will get the exact similar amount of salt and pepper in your sandwich, whether you have it in New York or you have it in Bombay. So then the CC Africa, CEO, Steve Fitzgerald, he came up with the bouquet himself. He said, look, this is another bouquet, and none of the two flowers are similar. There are a lot of bush, shrubs, grass, and, lot of, wildflowers. If two flowers are similar or identical, it's just sheer coincidence. So then he put both the sort of, bouquets to the board. He said, which one you would like to pick up? Probably 50 years or maybe 20 years ago, most of the people would have picked up those identical looking cookie cutter, roses, bunch of roses. Here he said that the organization is vase, flower vase, and the bunch of flowers is basically a diversification you're offering. So how well you can weave all the diversification into one kind of, brand entity is I believe is going to be the future of or how we can inculcate infotainment and reality show within the hospitality and tourism industry, and that's the future of the industry. And another thing, the more indigenous, the more micro it is the new luxury. It is not about bringing Kerala to a village home in Rajasthan and in the name of ethnic calling it authentic. It is not. It is basically how much regional, seasonal, local deep diving you are doing. So what is happening across the world, like the macro is eating micro, the homogeneous is eating indigenous, English is eating Hindi, Hindi is eating smaller language formats, pop is eating bhangra, bhangra is eating Bollywood, Bollywood is eating smaller dance forms, fusion cuisine is eating continental cuisine, continental cuisine is eating Chinese cuisine, Chinese cuisine is eating Punjabi cuisine, and Punjabi cuisine is eating all other smaller forms of cuisine. So just like in cancer, your micro cells are eaten by macro cells, and eventually macro also gets finished one day. So in the same way, this is what exactly is happening in tourism and hospitality. Everything is becoming homogeneous. So when everything is becoming homogeneous and most of the big daddies are putting their big bucks onto promoting the homogeneous, there is the new luxury is going to go against the current. Now
Correct.
it is easier said than done. How methodically you can go against the current, that's what matters. How if you are into if you get the art of getting into it, indigenous, and kind of giving your bhatki dal without fleece, that's the sort of right balance. How you can manage the flies on the dal and still you can give that bhatki dal without garam masala and just one jakia ka tadka in deshi ghee. So this is what sort of I feel that is the current I mean, best thing to do for business, best thing to do for people, and best thing to do for planet. All three P are covered in this approach.
Brilliant,
Rachna,
brilliant, brilliant.
sorry, Rachna, can I
Yes,
just
yes,
put in
yes.
a word here?
Please, please.
There was a recent report from the World Tourism Organization which
Mhm.
said that of the total tourism activities and hospitality activities which take place globally, the
Mhm.
segment we are talking about, sustainability, etc., is only between 3 and 4% of total global tourism activity. So we
Correct.
have to really think twice. And I'm not trying to say that we should ignore the debate we are having today or ignore this segment. I'm just saying, let us not romanticize it to the extent we
Yes.
lose track of the reality of business, the reality of world today. Whether that's good or bad is a separate debate. But I think our segment, what we are talking about today, has a long, long way to go before it becomes a major player within the tourism portfolio, so to say. So I just thought I'll share this with you.
Absolutely, absolutely.
In
And
fact,
our
Rachna, if I
we
can
know.
just if I
Yes,
can just
yes,
add
please.
to what Hemant is saying, if it is 3 to 4% globally, definitely in
Mhm.
India, it is probably about less than 1 or 2%. Let's
Correct,
remember that the Indian context is
correct.
very different also.
Yes,
So
yes.
he's right. There is no point indulging in a tourism activity which is just sustainable, like Rupesh said,
Okay.
which is only environment, if the economics doesn't work out.
Work.
Which is
Yes.
why, at the Global Sustainable Tourism Council, when we look at the different pillars of sustainable tourism, one of the first things we talk about is economic sustainability. If it doesn't
Yes.
make business sense on one side, and on the
Why
other
would you
side,
do it?
hopefully you haven't
Yes.
built your resort on some forest land or land that is illegally sort of acquired from tribals, or it is
Yes.
land that is in the cores of a floodplains. So your economic sustainability sort of kicks in there also. So it is
Yes.
really, really small in India, but the fact remains that it is the only way to go forward just to ensure that sustainability of the overall industry. I just wanted to add this point.
One more thing I would like to add here, that there is basically what we
No,
are revolving.
yeah.
I think his audio is stuck because of.
Yeah, there
He
is a
comes back.
bad connection, I
We will give you an
think.
opportunity to kind of join again and give his views. Rachna ma'am, you can
Yeah.
carry on with the second set of
But
questions.
yeah, yes, I in fact have something that is kind of relevant to everything that what we've been talking, that depending on the location, tourism is one of the world's largest and fastest growing industries. It all depends on the location. And of course, this is going to put a lot of stress on diverse habitats and indigenous cultures, which are used to support often the mass tourist destinations and the mass tourism. Increasingly destination and tourism operators are endorsing and following responsible tourism. But the question is, how do we make sure that we can indeed achieve these goals? That's my first question. The second question that I want you all to think about is that, the local communities that benefit from this sustainable tourism, we have this issue of how much money do they have the money to invest? There is a lack of incentive program. What are the business priorities of the people who are investing? And finally, the government has its own agenda. How do you deal with the government? Because there are values and ulterior motives of the government officials that often have to be taken into account, when you assess the motives for sustainable tourism. So I want you all, especially both you, Ram, and Himmat, since you people have been running obviously very successful programs, in both your endeavors. Where did you find yourself? One, impacting the fragile ecosystem. How do you counter that? And secondly, the government, the ulterior motives of the governments. How do you counter that? Did you hear? I'm not sure whether I was heard or not.
Yeah, we heard your
Ravi?
question.
Sorry, my net connection was not sustainable,
Yes,
so
yes.
I was offline for a while.
Mine too. I
We have
cannot
given
see.
the question, and we will come back to you post this to kind of add your views, so you can park it till such time this goes on.
Rupesh, very quickly, the questions I'm putting forth right now at this point is two. One, the fragile ecosystems that we endanger, creating an empathy between the tourist and the host community, because you have habitats and indigenous cultures which are possibly harmed by when you have mass tourism. How do you make sure that we can achieve the goals of sustainable tourism and keeping the cultures alive? This of course addresses your thing on homogeneity that is being sort of pushed by everybody. And secondly, how do you deal with the government? Because the government has its own ulterior motives, and these have to be taken into account. Sometimes it's a very ecologically sensitive or remote area, and it does not have the carrying capacity for a new tourism venture. So what do? Do you shut down locations? Like I know in Lithuania, for example, they shut everything down for 3 months or 2 months, I'm not sure, giving time and giving the place to breathe and rejuvenate and whatever. Do you do this, or how do you deal with it, and how have you dealt with it? Not you per se, but I'm sure Ram must have faced a lot of idiotic government intervention, or maybe he did not. Himmat, I know, would have, because the moment you set out on a venture, the government bureaucrats seem to think, oh, you're out to make money, and so you have to share. And you can't turn around and tell them, why don't you get into the business instead of sitting in your fat seat? So how do you deal with that? How do you deal with the indigenous culture, the problems of fragility of the indigenous cultures, and with the government also trying to, put in its two bit? Ram, could we start with you?
Sure. There is no discussion on how do we preserve indigenous culture, indigenous arts, and all of that, because that has to be done for tourism to be meaningful. So for me, anybody who says, they want to build a resort and it is actually in sort of tribal land which they're trying to take off, there's no discussion there. You cannot do that. When it comes to indigenous cultures, indigenous art forms, food forms, everything, for me, there is zero tolerance when it comes to these issues. Because we have to remember something. Tourism survives on showcasing some of this. I always say most of the assets of the tourism industry don't belong to the tourism industry. Instead, the tourism industry borrows these assets, and that's how the tourism industry prospers. That being the case, you're not going to kill the goose that lays a golden egg for yourself. So it's absolutely stupid you're right. I've seen it in many instances where tourism operators and hospitality establishments showcase indigenous cultures in a manner that is so distasteful, that is not authentic,
Yeah.
that is vulgar, and I detest it completely, and I chide these people who sort of do that, but it does happen. So, as any responsible tourism operator or a hospitality establishment, preserving anything that is indigenous is just a bounden duty. There is no discussion there. There's no discussion of should we, shouldn't we, how much should we, how much we shouldn't. There's no such discussion. We are meant to preserve that because that is what feeds the tourism industry, and you don't want to kill that. That's on one side of the story. The second side of the story, government, ulterior motives. I've been running my place for 14 years now. And when I came back to India, this is the first time I worked in India, starting my resort. And everybody told me, oh my God, how are you going to survive? How are you going to manage? And quite honestly, for me, minimum government interference, and I'm happy. I don't want the government anywhere close to me because I'm a private entrepreneur. And as an entrepreneur, I don't even want the subsidies that the government wants to offer. But of course, sometimes it's mandated, you have to take it. And even if there was only one instance when I looked for subsidy that was with my sustainability aspects. I was putting up a windmill and solar panels. So for a hybrid system, the government of India, those days in 2006, gave a 50% subsidy on the capex. And I was told, no, you should apply for it because that's the only way people will know that you have actually implemented something like that. So I applied for the subsidy. And I had to actually follow up at multiple levels for that subsidy amount to come. It was just about 10, 12 lakhs. And lots of people, influential people within the government told me, because I was not getting it, I was running from pillar to post and it wasn't coming. And for me, it was not the absolute quantum of money as much as it is my right and I needed to get it. At one point, I was told by somebody senior, there's this guy who does the evaluation, just give him a couple of lakhs and it'll happen overnight. And I said, I will not. I did not succumb to it. Until now, I have not succumbed to any of those issues. Now, but what I have done is I insulated my own business by ensuring that a lot of senior bureaucrats in the industry know about my business. And it naturally happened because I was invited to give a lot of talks in forums like this here. So I insulated myself. Anytime I had a problem, I would call somebody at the senior most level and tell them, listen, this guy is asking me for a bribe. I don't want to pay a bribe. Can you help me? And they would always help me. So for me, I have on two sides. Whenever I've had a problem with governments, I've always got very, very good help from very senior bureaucrats. But the trick was to know a lot of these senior bureaucrats, and I guess naturally with the kind of work you do, you kind of get to know them. So for me, government, it doesn't bother me much because I'm not going to go to the government ever with a begging bowl saying, I want this money, I want the subsidy. Because it's when you do that you're indebted to some power centers within the government. And as long as you don't, you just ignore those power centers and do what you do best. And that is something that we always focus on, saying, we built the first 100% eco resort and we are just going to focus on that. Built a model. I wrote a book about it. The book got released, in Delhi. So we just focus on the work and just try and ignore as much as possible this government interference, and I say that with vehemence because lots of times, lots of tourism operators say, oh, government is not doing this, government is not doing that. And I always say, if we are private entrepreneurs, we should have our own energy without having to depend on government to do stuff for us. A country as large as India, 1.3 billion people, let the government do what they're meant to do in terms of looking after poverty alleviation and all those issues. You're running tourism establishments. Damn it, forget about the government. Do what you have to do. And, don't look for sops. Don't go with a begging bowl. And then you will be fine because you will immediately be taking the high ground. I've not even taken the MDA that the government offers. Not even once. The marketing development allocation there. Not even once I've taken, because I said that if I can't run my own business without subsidies being baked into my balance sheet, then there's something wrong, with my business model itself. So I don't care about government because it doesn't come in the way of my business model.
Perfect. I think that makes a lot of sense. Thank you so much. But we have to remember that, we do have to go to the government for certain permissions, for certain clearances. Sometimes it's for a loan from the bank, etc., etc. But I absolutely agree with what you're saying, Ram. We had the same problem. We tried to stupidly work with the Khadi Gram Udyog and ran into such hot water that I'm still recovering from that rude shock 13 years back. So I understand much better to stay far away from the government. But I'm sure Himmat has other things to tell us, because whether or not you like it, sometimes just as a stamp of what would you call it? Like you're in the big league, or you've actually arrived, or you're actually, you are, what is the word for it? I'm not able to find the right word. When all the boxes are ticked, if you have some association with the government, so for people, I think sometimes it is necessary that you get the stamp of approval. Let me say that way. Let me put it that way. It's a stamp of approval that, okay, the government does.
No, before Himmat starts, Rachana, this I believe is the Indian mentality. That we are saying stamp of approval is government. Why? You can be your own stamp of approval. I never got a certification for my resort ever, because I said that I don't need somebody else to tell me that what I'm doing is right. As long as my guests believe me and trust me, and when they come here, they see the sincerity with which what you're doing. As long as I get that, and that goes viral in the world today, I don't need somebody to give me a chapa saying that, oh, you are the best. We're not in school and college anymore where your principal needs to give you a certificate to say, oh, you're a good boy. So which the only way your parents will prove that we will be convinced that you're a good boy. Those days are over. And don't get me wrong. It's not like I've dealt with the government. I've had a bad experience and I've said, I don't want government.
Yes. I got that.
From the beginning, I told myself, as long as we do good work, government will come and recognize you. And if they recognize you, fine. If they don't, fine. It doesn't matter. As long as your peers recognize you, which is proved by a lot of awards and stuff like that, as long as your peers recognize you, and your customers, most importantly, if they believe you and they recognize you, you don't need anybody else. Sorry, I was kept it to Himmat's time.
No. Absolutely. But let me rephrase it very quickly, because I think I wasn't very clear. What I meant was that, stupid, simple things like Sarai Act, you need to be registered for a homestay. There are certain parameters. Otherwise, how will you run your business? It's a campsite. You need XYZ. You need a clearance from the forest authority that you're not using forest land. You need a thing from the tourism authority to say, yes, this is a viable thing. We endorse it. You might need something from. I'm talking about permissions like that. I'm talking about permission, because you can't just run you can't just run a business without the proper regulatory authorities. That is what I'm saying. So you do have a run-in with the government, whether you like it or not. So I was talking about that. How do you deal with that? But I understand very clearly, because I'm in the same, I believe in the same thing, that, you do your own thing and they'll come a begging to you. And let's not look at SOPs and let's not look at grants. Let's just see, let's go slow. Let's just, take one step at a time and we can sustain ourselves. But Himmat, over to you. Two things: impacting the local indigenous population with whatever you are doing. How is it harming them? How is it helping them? Or is it letting them be the way they are? And your run-ins with the government for, when you needed or you required whatever the regulatory permissions. How do you deal with that?
So I think we have to look at it at a macro and a micro level. Now, when you look at it at a macro level, and you mentioned about how many number of tourists should come, how do you control that? Let's look what Bhutan has done. Bhutan has so nicely controlled the number of people it allows to visit every year at a certain price point, finished. And they've dealt with it beautifully. And that's why Bhutan today is one of the most sought after destinations as far as inbound tourism is concerned, because they've really controlled and managed. And I think countries like India, we are nowhere near them in this, but there is a lot for us to learn controlled tourism from countries like Bhutan. Look at our hill stations today, Rachna. They are an absolute mess. They are disaster after disaster happening. And I was in Mount Abu 2 weeks back looking for a property there. And I was informed that in 2002, there was a ruling in Mount Abu that no further construction can take place there. That means at the barrier of Mount Abu at the border, no truck carrying any eat, saria, reti, anything can come in without a token of the DM. And since 2002 till 20, now 18 years, there has been hardly any construction in that hill station. So it proves to me that there is a will, provided the local administration doesn't want to make that fast buck of tourism, provided that the bureaucracy there is honest and straightforward in what they do, because Mount Abu for me is a living example of what they've done in 18 years. As far as the government is concerned, I think I really don't care about the government, because the government doesn't care about tourism or about hospitality. We are there as a milking cow for GST collection, and it stops over there. So much as we keep saying we contribute 10% to India employment, we contribute 10% to GDP, government has never heard us in the past. They will not hear us in the future. So let's forget the government. I think each one has to be on their own. So given that the government is irrelevant to me in my business, what is relevant to me is the system. Because it is the system I have to go to take my clearances. It is the system I have to go to get all my approvals, etc., etc. I can do without the government. I can't do without the system. So I have to go to the system to get my statutory clearances. There are two thoughts on this. Some people like Ram will say, I will not pay. I had the similar thought process when I started 12 years ago. I said, to hell with it. You want me to pay, tell me what you want me to pay and do my job for me. Because I think, again, like I said, I'm not here to change the country. I'm not here to change the world. Corruption is the DNA of this country. I accept that and I say it openly without any bias. It is the DNA of India. Am I strong enough to change the DNA? No, I'll jack my business. So am I going to run after 5,000 rupees paid, not paid? Or do I want to take care of my business? What is my priority? So if the system says you pay, I pay the system. If the system does my work without making me pay, I don't pay. I'm just that clear in it. So yeah, I think it's the system which is more important. Government is not important for us. Like Ram said, they have larger responsibilities about poverty, about the global economy, about Corona, about Mr. Modi's global image, etc., etc., etc. So let them carry on with that, and we guys will tackle the system at our level.
Okay, thank you so much. Thank you so much. Again, very direct, very clear, and very in your face. I like that. Rupesh, could we have your views, please?
Well, we didn't have much of the interaction with the government in terms of since we had a very different kind of format of tourism. So I didn't have much of personal exposure in terms of taking compliance related the system interaction. Whatever little bit was there as a basic hygiene factor that had been kind of taken care of. But I would digress a bit from the subject, and I would, rather, since I had the other kind of interaction with government ecosystem, when we did this Bakri Swayambar, we, the event became popular, little larger than life for the rural, the place where we were operating. So suddenly government kind of, interjected, and they wanted to, be the partner in that, the tourism department and the animal husbandry department. And they tried to pull the event, back to Dehradun because they can invite certain ministers and media people. So there was a serious stiff on that, it is done for the goat herders. It is not done for your own publicity. So what if you really, besides what Himmat quoted as a, use the term system, something which is mandate for system is mandate for system. You can't operate without that. That you have to sort of, whether you grease the palm and get your work done, or you use your relationship and get the work done, or whatever, different folks, different strokes. But as far as the, at the cost of, digressing a bit, if it is about grants, subsidy, etc., then either you be a true entrepreneur or you be a full-time specialist of grant and subsidies. You will spend your lifetime and you will be doing round and circle and you will not reach anywhere. And, for example, I'll quote another this thing, what government does. Government, for example, Uttarakhand, 20 years, 10 chief ministers, and migration had been the biggest, one of the biggest political agenda. They spent some 15,000 crore rupees to get one single reverse migration model in place, but they could not achieve. Now, certain players, like, when they have some investors meet, or, they have some delegation coming in, they would quote us as if we are their handiwork, where they have not contributed a penny in, or, iota of their, any kind of, effort or intervention of government. We have, we haven't benefited so far. But they would project as if, it's been kind of, their handiwork, and they have a role to play in that. So if you really want to, so I would kind of, break it into two parts, government and system aside. And, there are a lot of young bureaucrats who have a very progressive mindset. They would help you at personal level, because they believe in your cause. They would help you at personal level. They are also a great tool for, making things easier for you, and also to market you. But if you go to that whole, bureaucracy and the political ecosystem, you are, unless you want to become a specialist of that, it is, it is a counterproductive activity. And if you really want to learn what not to do, you should, learn from the government, actually. And that's my take on that.
Okay, I think that makes a lot of sense. I think we are now opening the webinar to questions, and I have a very first question from Fazal Khan, who I think might be asking Ram. So would you please just listen to this a little carefully?
I
It
guess
says
we'll
every
keep
topic of
Rachna ma'am, we'll
sorry?
keep the question
Yeah.
open. Any
Yeah.
panel member who wants to take it is more than
Yeah.
welcome to kind of take the question. But I feel it's a very relevant
Okay,
question.
absolutely. So
Over to you. Yeah.
yes. Please listen to it carefully. Every topic of sustainability seems to be based on the latest science of limiting damage to future generations. Whether it's the ozone hole, the global warming, the microplastic pollution, climate change, carbon footprints, etc. So the question is, what are we trying to sustain when the foundation yardsticks keep changing? Should we keep changing the norms of luxury, education, and cultural awareness, and love for earthly and emotional leisure, or should we keep it respectful to local policies? So, because you see, one region's luxury is another region's love. So, you see, this was in fact would have been my last question had we had that first to luxury. So, please, do you like to repeat the question, or have you heard it? Is Ram there? I can't see him.
Yeah, I am back, but
Okay.
your question was breaking up.
All right. So I'm repeating again. Every topic of sustainability seems to be based on the latest science of limiting damage to future generations. Whether it's the ozone hole, the global warming, the microplastic pollution, the climate change, carbon footprints, etc. So the question is, what are we trying to sustain when the foundation yardsticks keep changing? Should we keep changing the norms of luxury, of education, and of cultural awareness, and love for earthly and emotional leisure, or we keep it respectful to local policies? Because one region's luxury can be another region's love.
Question from Mr. Fazal Shah. Thanks for raising the question, Fazal. We appreciate your concerns.
So, Ravi, will you, some of you moderate as to when we answer which question?
I guess you can take it, sir. And
Yeah,
then
we
other
start
panelists can add their views.
with Ram, Sam, and Rupesh. Yeah, let's follow this as a sequence. Ravi, Ram, Himmat, and Rupesh.
Sure.
And I'm sorry
now,
if you think you have nothing. Sorry. One second. I'm sorry, I'm interrupting. If you feel that you want to pass the question, that is fine. That if you do not have to add anything to it, that is fine. So we'll start with Ram, and if Himmat would like to say something, and then Rupesh. Please. Sorry.
yeah, my only point to that question is there is so much that needs to be preserved. We've gone too long with just trying to destroy, like Himmat's read right in the beginning. As an industry, we are a destruction industry, we're destruction specialists. So if today we say ozone hole, tomorrow we say carbon footprint. If day after tomorrow we talk about saving the bees and go on, it's only because our destruction footprint has been so wide. Yes, every day we include newer things that need to be preserved and conserved. And that's only because of the way we behaved until now. So it's not that they're shifting goalposts. There is just so much to be done. So you get into the space, then be prepared that there is a hell of a lot that needs to be done. It's not that it's shifting constantly, will be my only answer.
Okay. I think that makes a lot of sense. That makes a lot of sense. Himmat?
I'll
आप
pass.
बताइए.
I'll pass.
Okay. Okay. Rupesh?
Well, we as a civilization, human civilization, Homo sapiens, we came into existence, I believe, some 12,000 years ago. And the moment we started tilling the land, that was the beginning of our decline or corruption. We kind of killed the other forms of sapiens and took the reign over. And then, we got into more and more complicated systems, like, from a tribe to a kingdom to religion to other institutions. So we had been onto that whole, journey of roti, kapda, makan had been, for last 12,000 years, we had been just revolving around it. But now I feel we have arrived to a plateau during this COVID times that, we have excess of roti, we have excess of kapda, we have excess of makan. 60% commercial and personal, concrete establishments are deserted. People are not dying out of hunger, they are dying out of overeating. And if there is some journalist finds somebody dying out of hunger, his career is made. People, 70% of our cloth is going in, landfill. After automobile, I believe textile is another, pollution creating industry. And a lot of, farmers are suiciding with Vidarbha, Telangana, Africa, because of our sudden hunger for cotton. So now the graph, right now we are at plateau. Now we are going to, decline after this plateau. And the three new needs are going to be saaf hawa, saaf zameen, saaf pani, and the fourth dimension is going to be the internet. Now, there is a question, whether this will become saaf hawa, saaf zameen, saaf pani will become industry or not. But, it will probably become an industry of future as long as our race survives. So the precise answer for the, what Faisal asked, we as a human, we know that we are probably going to die, we are decaying with every passing day, but yet we make an attempt to live. So despite of knowing that everything, eventually everything is going to end, but till the time we are surviving, we are conscious, we are in sort of, organized entity, or as an individual, we have to make certain attempts to, make it work and make it better. So this is always a, good and evil will keep fighting, and without both good and evil, story is not complete. That's what I would like to,
I will quickly like to add, my views here. Faisal, so I don't think that we need to look at anybody's yardstick. I think the yardstick should be our own yardstick. We as human race should understand what is good for the, nature and what is not so good for the nature. And every small little step in our daily life also contributes towards a sustainable future. So the yardstick is something that is our own yardstick. As far as looking at government norms are concerned, I will put the same stuff again. I think with the plethora of knowledge that is available on the internet and the learning that you can do, I guess keep contributing the way you are, keep, have this thoughts volatility with you, but then keep doing your bit. And I think that's what we need to look at. With this, I will open we are delayed by 10 minutes, but we open it for questions. Anybody, any participants want to ask any questions, feel free to raise your hands and your mic will be open for asking the questions in person. So Vipul, please be prepared if there is any question. We did not receive any questions in messages so far. So if for the next 2 minutes, if you don't get any questions, then we kind of.
In the meantime, should carry on a little own conversations, because I think it will be interesting for the participants.
Yep.
To hear what you have, very eminent members who have a lot of experience. So I wanted to also place before you all was that, there is a lot of aspirational travel, because people traditionally who've had money or the freedom to travel were doing it. And this is not for the last 100 years or 1,000 years or 2,000 years. This has been forever. You know, when a traveler travels out, there is safety involved. There is also a sense of what is something new that you're going to learn. People travel for different reasons. So we juxtapose this. Again, of course, as Rupesh very rightly said, the norms are changing now. If you go to Silicon Valley, then you have people in absolute torn t-shirts and shorts and the new and the new billions and the old all the old ideas of what constitutes a person who of travel in a reasonably luxurious looking at those same parameters, not necessarily business class, but just to travel as comfortably, hygienically, and not come back dead with some crazy disease or something. So how do you juxtapose that with because people when you're traveling, there is money involved. So how do you take that away and say and then put sustainability at the other side? Or if going off into the wilderness is what you want to do, then you probably go to a particular kind of program. And also what Rupesh, what you mentioned about people are dying of overeating, etc. That is still not the case for India. There is a huge market over here that we need to address, that who want out all are displace that in the sustainable in the realm of sustainable travel, because you have Choki Dhani, you have that wonderful museum in the south, Dakshin Chitra. You have other places which have just because it is old doesn't necessarily make it the right way to do things. That is why you have progress. That is why you have technology. That is why you have changing norms. Things change because, it is just easier and more efficient, which has its own fall as per cons. So where do you place sustainable tourism and going back to your roots and going back to the times of old, which is not necessarily the right? How do you do that? We just have another question. Please boliye. Rupesh.
Sorry, Rachna, you were breaking. I couldn't gather you completely.
Yeah, even I couldn't hear the question at all.
Oh, okay. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, maybe if Ravi can reproduce, because his voice is more sharper and clearer as compared to your.
Ravi, did you hear me?
Could you hear me? Again, it was breaking.
Okay, so very quickly, I'm talking about aspirational travel. Not now, but for so many years, for hundreds, thousands of years, only people who had the wherewithal and the means would travel. And people ape who they consider as successful people. Now, whether you consider a successful person as somebody who's a philosopher and follow his footsteps, or somebody who can follow his steps, who this man and follow his footsteps, is entirely individual. But when you aspire the whole shebang. So if you're aspiring, don't want rooms that are made of gold, and if you want to aspire to be like off the top of my head, like Picasso or maybe Che Guevara, whoever. So you then aspire to travel the way he, maybe you will be backpacking across the world. So how do you juxtapose? How do you address that question, that if you cannot provide what the visitor wants, you'll have to get them to learn what you think is right for them? Is that the way you're going to face it? I mean, are you going to get them to unlearn what they think is the right thing? Or are you going to give them what they want with a little twist? Or are you going to have a completely...
Let me very quickly, from my perspective, answer this. It's a question of managing customer expectation. As long as you very clearly tell the customer, this is what to expect to come when you come to my resort, you are okay. Customers who feel that is comfortable will come. People who say that's not comfortable will not come. So I remember at one time we used to have a lot of people, from the US, returning Indians who used to come on vacations who wanted to visit our place. And I remember a couple of calls where they said, "Oh my God, this is on a farm. Will there be insects? Will there be creepy crawlies? Will there be all of that there? Oh my God, how do we manage?" But they still wanted to come and play all the rural games like gilli danda and flying kites and going in a bullock cart ride. So we used to very clearly tell them, listen, we live on a farm, which means life is very active. Now, for your comfort, all the rooms have meshes in them. We fumigate the rooms with sambrani and few other mud, not with chemical sort of fumigation. We do all that on a very regular basis. But if you feel you have an allergy towards insects, and if you panic when you see a frog sort of coming in your pathway, or if a dragonfly flies into your room by mistake, if you have a phobia towards that, please, we are not the resort for you. Please don't come to our resort. I've said this on a dozen occasions to customers, and I don't feel shy to tell people that this is not built for you. It's built for another kind of customer, and it's okay. This is no judgment on you as a traveler. You want something else, and that's all right. I mean, you want to go to a luxury resort where they have one particular resort I've been to, in that one single room and the balcony, they had 20 bulbs and 32 pillows. That is what you want, which is okay. You will not get that in my place. So I think it's a question of managing expectations very clearly to ensure that there is no disappointment. When the customer pays you, whatever, 10, 20, 30,000 rupees for the experience, you just manage the expectations.
Makes sense.
Will come in
Makes
here,
complete sense.
and this question is coming from Mr. Sharad Negi. But in the meanwhile, I really like the aspect with the sense of humor that Mr. Ramkumar said. 20 bulbs and 30 pillows. Oh gosh, I don't know what you do with them. Great. So this is coming from Mr. Negi. What if we talk about balance? Balance between sustainability and responsibilities. What will be your thoughts about the balance between them? I think I'll ask Mr. Rupesh to take this question, because I feel that in his projects, there is a lot of balance that he has tried to create. So over to you, Mr. Rupesh.
Well, that balance is, as I stated earlier, it has to be the sort of a fine balance between your profit, your social responsibilities, and your environmental responsibilities. Now, how do you achieve this it depends upon various dynamic factors, place to place. There is no sort of cookie cutter formula or fixed method to achieve that. So responsibility is more of a trait, and sustainability is a kind of is like a byproduct of that trait. So there is no you can't actually find that balance between responsibility and sustainable tourism, but you can find responsible tourism itself is a balanced form of tourism. Okay, it is when the three parameters of sustainability, they are perfectly balanced against each other, then it can be collectively called as responsibility or responsible tourism. Okay, hope I had been sort of able to.
Mr. Sharad,
Ravi, can I just make one?
Of course.
What Rupesh said is so right. Now, the challenge is some of us intuitively know the balance and we gravitate towards that balance, people in this panel here today. But for a lot of people, achieving this balance is a huge challenge. And that is why the United Nations and the WTO charge the Global Sustainable Tourism Council to give some kind of guidance for people to help achieve that balance. So the criteria that is that has been put out by the Global Sustainable Tourism Council, which is the GSTC, is to help people get this balance by giving them some kind of a guidance. And once you get into those guidelines, then I think your intuition will also kick in, and then you'll gravitate towards that balance. But the balance is very important. And if you're looking for a starting point, that starting point is out there in the public forum. for consumption by the public.
Yeah, I would also like to kind of quote one more thing, about this. For example, a lot of things we do thinking that it's towards sustainability, but that is more of our aspiration we try to impose on the local dwellers. For example, there was a very coveted project called Water ATM in, I think Kathiawar part of Gujarat, where, women folk used to walk for some 5 kilometers to get, fetch water in the Gagri. And Tata Trust came up with a water ATM. They said that, okay, you have this ATM, you can swipe whatever amount of water you need, and you can refill this against some kind of collective shramdan, or maybe barter it against your milk or whatever farm produce you are doing. So it got a lot of international acclaim and coveted awards, etc. But the project failed within 6 months, because they didn't realize that the women folk, they needed to bitch about their mother-in-laws, father-in-laws, and talk about take out their pent-up emotion, and that 5-kilometer walk up and down, that used to serve that particular purpose. Another example, we in Taj Safari, we started providing I used to work with this organization some 10 years ago. We did a very ambitious activity providing gobar gas chulhas to the villagers, and it became so popular that a lot of people, they started getting more and more cattle to get subsidy for that gas chulha. And there was a man-animal conflict. Predators used to kill their cattle, and then they used to, in revenge, they used to kind of support poachers. So sometimes we try to impose our own aspiration without actually. And another example, in Uttarakhand, wherever there is a road, maximum amount of migration has happened from those villages. The moment there is no migration, a road comes and migration happens. So those roads are actually, rather than serving as a purpose for retaining people in the village, it is actually serving as a tool to do the reverse migration. So lot of things, we think that we are doing or offering as a stakeholder or as a government or as an organization, we are offering to, offering towards sustainability, but eventually it becomes counterproductive in nature.
Thank you so much, Mr.
Yes. Sorry, I was just adding to that. Absolutely right, Rupesh. But then is the answer not making roads and keeping people in against their wishes, or allowing them to make a decision? Because I've had that experience too. We've gone into in the interiors, and I've like a stupid city dweller. You say, "Oh, this is so beautiful. It should remain like this." And this guy next to me, he says, "I'll break your leg just now." And then how beautiful will it be if you cannot reach the hospital?
One needs to make road. But
Yes,
I believe
yes.
if you have to prioritize, if you have to put in a sequence that what to be done first. So I believe first is the social engineering you need to do. You need to touch that soft sentiment. It is not lack of opportunity. People are like not happy with their lives in rural India. It's lack of self-esteem, which by and large every sort of country where we had been ruled by colonial powers, we suffer. So it is social engineering or that market linkage or making them feel their life is sexy. That needs to be done first. Then road should follow. If you do it other way around, then the drain will happen in reverse direction.
You'll have trouble. Yes.
Yep. So
Totally agree on you with all points.
yeah, great. We have extended the time limit, and thank you so much for all the panelists and the participants to kind of be stuck on to us, glued on to us for another half an hour. With this, I guess we will bring this to an end, and a small thank you note to thank Mr. Himmat, Mr. Ramkumar, Mr. Rupesh, and Ms. Rachna Dushyant Singh for taking time out from your busy schedule and being a part of this webinar. Indeed, it was great amount of learning that I'm sure our our participants have got, and so have the panelists got ideas exchange and some think tanking that we have done today. This does not stop here. Let's keep the mission of doing our bit towards creating a better sustainable environment for our future generations on, and we will keep sharing on our social media sites as to what all things that we at Servo Hospitality School feels that we can contribute in terms of creating a better environment. So once again, thank you very much, all the panel members, all the participants, and the moderator, of course. You did a wonderful questioning, and I guess we had a great session. Thank you overall. Thank you from all of us at
Thank you.
Sartor Hospitality.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Rachana. Thank you.
Talk to you soon, Himmat.
Yeah.
Okay. Bye-bye. Yeah. Bye.